Happy Friday and welcome to the Rotary Club of Fort Worth. We are so excited to have so many people here in person, and to get us started, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Scott Hackler, founder and CEO of Halo del Santo, for our invocation, followed by the national anthem performed by Wesley Gentle, Director of Advancement, Arts Council of Fort Worth. Scott?
You know, I thought I knew pressure, and then this amateur was asked to give the invocation with 3 pros in the front row, so bear with me. Let us pray. Most gracious God, you were there when we took our very first steps, and ever since you've traveled alongside each of us on the paths that we've chosen. Dozens and dozens of separate paths winding all over the country and the globe. Today we find ourselves in the very same place at the exact same time. In your divine wisdom, you have led every one of us here. Dear God, calm our minds and open our hearts so that we might be fully present. Thank you for your many blessings, too numerous to count. Build a hedge of protection around us so that we might live many more years in order to serve others, and in so doing, to serve you. And just as you accompanied each of us into this space, accompany us out into the world every step we take for the rest of our days. We join together and praise your holy name with one voice. Amen.
Thank you. You may sit. Thank you very much. You know, one of the things that I appreciate the most about Rotary, not just locally, but internationally, is that some of you may know it's the largest volunteer organization, largest service organization in the world. Rotary is in more than 200 countries. There are over 1.2 million Rotarians, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with what we're about to see on the screen, and that's the 4-way test. So if you'll say it with me, number 1, is it the truth? Number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And I just want to reiterate it. It doesn't matter what language you speak, the color of your skin, what or who you call God. I think one of the reasons that Rotary has lasted this long is because of the foundation of the 4-way test. All right, up next is a very special treat. We have the Director of Advancement, Arts Council of Fort Worth. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Wesley and the Gentles. Oh, just kidding. But before we do that, how about we go to Ed McClin? Even more specialer of a treat, we have welcoming visiting Rotarians and guests. And so with that, I'll ask Ed McClin, Managing Director of Larkin Addison LLC, to come up, and I will step away from the microphone. Ed?
I hope y'all can hear me okay. They're supposed to bring a couple of phone books for me to stand on, but I heard they're running low on booster seats. But anyway, I'd like to welcome our guests today. If you would stand after I announce your name. We have Pastor Kristen Claude, who's a guest of Jonathan Berry. We have Mavi Patel, who's a guest of Shanna Saldana. We have Lauren Burge, who's a guest of Stephen Rayside. We have Kayla Mosley, who's a guest from the Rotary Club. And this is the fun one. We have Sadra Turhan, who's an international student at TCU from Turkey. And also want to welcome anyone that's out there on Zoom that's a guest. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for that. All right, now it's time. It's the moment you've been waiting for. Wesley Gentle, Director of Advancement, Arts Council of Fort Worth, for a, let's just say, a different kind of newscast. Let's give him that newscast welcome.
Oh, boy. Oh, wow. Oh, I feel about as welcome as a Fort Worth Episcopalian and a Fort Worth Episcopal Church. Okay, good. We got it here. We got it here. Yeah, you can Google that. I don't have the time or the legal expertise to get into it now. Speaking of time, we are very short on time. We've got a great panel today, so I kind of want to jump into things here. And I will say, as the son of not one, but two pastors, and actually the grandson of yet another one, I know by now not to talk about religion during lunch. So this newscast, we're going to steer clear of all other religious topics and dive right into politics. So let's get this started. All right, we got a lot to cover today. There's a major expose of wealthy Americans' tax records that got leaked. There's an announcement of a fifth world ocean called the Southern Ocean. Fort Worth chose between two impressive and highly qualified women in a runoff for mayor. There's a former president of the United States who didn't wear his pants backwards. And I am getting ahead of myself. Let's just jump right into it, okay? So what you're seeing here is, believe it or not, a pair of
I'm so sorry. I stepped away during the invocation to make a sandwich and kind of forgot I was doing the newscast today, but whoa, what is he doing here?
I'm doing the newscast. Today is my day to do
No, that's not right. John put me down on the calendar for today's newscast months ago.
Okay, yeah, but a lot's happened in a couple months. I mean, things are opening up. More than 50% of Americans have had at least one shot from the COVID vaccine.
Okay. So people are getting the vaccine.
Mhm.
Great. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can waltz up to the podium without a mask and wait, are you wearing pants? Are we wearing pants again?
Okay, small drawback to doing things in person. Yes. But look, I mean, things are good, right? Are you trying to say something? No, Wesley, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. We've been doing this for
saying this is a real bummer because I did prepare a song for today.
Oh, well, yeah, I wasn't going to sing because, studies show that aerosol carrying the virus protects even further when you, okay, y'all don't care about that. Do y'all want to hear him do a song today? Okay.
But what was that? The sound just cut out.
Oh, it was a lackluster applause that was saying you should go ahead.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Let me cue this up. This is actually a duet, and I think you might know it. Pearl Fisher's, right?
Okay.
I'm playing the role of Zoomiga.
Oh,
Get it?
no one is going to get that joke, Wesley.
Yeah, no, maybe not. But just like opera, you don't have to understand it to enjoy it.
Can't argue with that. Walk and pastors singing from their sofas, constant meetings, webcams freezing, while nurses risked their lives for days on end. Families unfriending over whether we should wear a mask. Okay, wait, is this just a random rhyming list of things that happened during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's the best I could do, the Zoom fatigue and all.
Okay, well, that's it, right? There's no more.
Oh, yeah, of course. No, this is opera, mon frere. Turn the page on your script, right? There's a lot more.
No. No, we cannot. We've got a great presentation to do.
Okay, look, the last verse is pretty clean. Let's skip to the last verse and take it from there. Right?
And Zoom Wesley. Thank you. Thank you. What a guy. All right, I think unfortunately that takes us to our time today. We've got a great presentation today, but weather this weekend shouldn't matter to you because we're all going to be in movie theaters watching 12 Mighty Orphans or Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights. So enjoy your weekend and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Wesley Gentle. Look at the standing ovation in the corner. I tell you, that was something else, Wesley. You have no idea how long it probably took him to figure out the timing. You made it look so easy, Wesley, and thank you for always using your talents here for to keep us entertained and keep us laughing. Because at the end of the day, that's why we love to come to Rotary, to see good people and to have a good time. So thanks again for that, Wesley. All right, moving forward, we have 2 new member introductions. It's my pleasure to welcome Secretary Blake Mormon to help us introduce our new member, Mike Crum. And Mike will also tell us a little something interesting about himself.
Thank you, President Carlo. Yes, Michael E. Crum, Public Events Department, City of Fort Worth. As Director of the Public Events Department of the City of Fort Worth, Mike Crum is responsible for the operation of the Fort Worth Convention Center, Will Rogers Memorial Center, and Office of Outdoor Events. Crum assumed leadership of the Public Events Department in February 2020. Prior to coming to Fort Worth, Crum served in a variety of executive management positions with the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority, the organization responsible for the management of the City of Charlotte sports, entertainment, and convention facilities, and the operation of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. During his 30-year tenure in Charlotte, he was involved in Charlotte's hosting of the national events like the NCAA Men's and Women's Final Four, Democratic and Republican National Conventions, ACC and NCAA basketball tournament events, and numerous college football games. He was a member of the Rotary Club of Charlotte and a Paul Harris Fellow. Mr. Michael Crum.
Thank you, Blake. February of 2020, you can tell I have a great sense of timing, right? So had 1 normal month in Fort Worth and then 16 months sabbatical, and here we are getting back to business. Thrilled to be back in Rotary. After a 20-year member in the Downtown Charlotte Club, and so looking forward to getting back to service above self. I'm an 11-month Rotarian from the standpoint that fun fact, as my kids would say, is my family is a place up in Northern Ontario that I think would take about 3.5 days to drive to from here. So when I disappear for the month of July, you'll know where I am. All right. Thank you, President Carl.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome to the club. Our next new member comes to us by way of Julie Butner, who is the Executive Director, President and CEO of the Tarrant Area Food Bank, and that is Dr. Shagranda Traveler.
Thank you, Carlo. I am pleased to introduce to you my fellow Rotarians, Dr. Shagranda Traveler. Shagranda recently joined Tarrant Area Food Bank as Executive Vice President, leading advocacy, marketing, communications, and culture for the organization. Shagranda has over 20 years of experience in community development, human resources. Dr. Traveler is recognized as the 2019 Community Champion of the Year by the National Black MBA Association. It is the International Excellent Award from Walden University Board of Directors. Shagranda earned a BBA from Walden University, an MBA from the University of Dallas, and her Bachelor's of Science from Louisiana Tech University College of Business. Committed, Shagranda is an active member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, proud alumni of Leadership Mansfield. Shagranda is married to Tommy and has two beautiful daughters, Lauren, who is 9 years old, and Tamir, who has just graduated from the Air Force Basic Training. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Rotarians, please welcome Dr. Shagranda Traveler.
Thank you, Julie, for that wonderful introduction. And so, team, I was told that I need to share somewhat a fun fact or a little funny story about myself. You've heard my background, but I want you to know how I sort of got into this realm of service. Back in my wonderful days at Louisiana Tech University, I was a astute volunteer kid, right? And I was volunteering at our Olympic-sized pool, and there was a charge that said, okay, everyone jump in. I jumped in, not realizing, one, I wasn't supposed to, two, that I couldn't swim, and then I was in full clothes. So I learned very quickly, one, to ask a lot of questions, but then the fear of jumping in quickly left, right? So for the past 25 years, I've taken the plunge. And so I'm very excited that I've taken the plunge to join Julie with the Tarrant Area Food Bank. And I'm just as excited to be taking the plunge and being a new Rotarian here with the Fort Worth chapter. So thank you all for having me. To Carlo, thank you. And to the selection committee, I appreciate you interviewing me and welcoming to your club. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Shagranda, and to Mike. All right. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our program, or the person who will introduce the program. And let me just say, as our panelists make it to the stage, that one of the things I'm most proud of this year during our Rotary term is the ability to tackle difficult subjects, controversial subjects, things that I know Wesley made fun about it in his newscast, but things that families don't talk about. And it has actually pulled some families apart. We have been able to talk about them, hard topics, with civility, dignity, and respect. And today is no exception. So it's my pleasure to now introduce our intrepid moderator for today's program, Karen Telshaw Johnson, President Attorney of Telshaw Johnson Law. Karen.
Thank you, President Carla. Speaking of diving in, you get a phone call from Fernando Acosta going, so what do you think about moderating a panel? Great. What do you think about moderating a religious panel? Okay. So let's take it this far. So a rabbi, a pastor, and an imam walk into Rotary. Can you do that? That's why we're here today. So thank you, Fernando. We have panelists who are clergy from 3 Abrahamic faith traditions. Imam Omar Suleiman, Rabbi Ralph Mecklenburger, and Reverend Charles Foster Johnson. The 3 of you, please come on up. These 3 panelists represent individuals who have made a commitment to bridge building and greater inclusiveness in our communities. Each will speak about the aspects of their faith that unites us rather than divides us. Our Rotary Club views this topic as relevant and timely because surveys indicate that younger generations are increasingly inclined to pursue spirituality individually rather than collectively. Rotary also has a tradition of valuing multi-faith traditions by having worked with the Multicultural Alliance so that our bylaws reflect inclusiveness and our invocations do too. As part of the Courageous Conversation series, we have to acknowledge that there are reasons that this is a courageous conversation. It is challenging to step outside of our comfort zones, to learn more, but it is also the only way that we grow. If after today you wish to continue your learning experiences to explore our different faith traditions, I highly encourage it, and to reach out to the Multicultural Alliance, of which Fernando and myself are board members. Also reach out to mcatexas.com that hosts interfaith dialogues and table talks with people of different faiths. For today, we will focus on what the future looks like with our 3 Abrahamic faith traditions. And no doubt that you have heard the phrase many times, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And so what does that actually mean to be spiritual, but not religious? So Imam Suleiman was the founder and president of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research and an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at Southern Methodist University. He led the opening prayer for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2019. Welcome, Imam. Reverend Johnson is pastor of Bread Fellowship Church here in Fort Worth and a fellow Rotarian. He is also the founder of Pastors for Texas Children, a statewide ecumenical organization mobilizing the faith community for public education, support, and advocacy. Rabbi Mecklenburger served congregations in San Francisco, California, and Ann Arbor, Michigan, before becoming senior rabbi of Bethel congregation here in Fort Worth, and also my rabbi and congregation for the last 32 years until his retirement in 2015. We tried not to let him retire, but his wife had enough. Last year, he published his most recent book because, during 2020, while we're all learning how to make bread and sew, Rabbi Mecklenburger decides to write a book. Why Call It God? Theology for the Age of Science. So some light reading, but an excellent book. So as an opening statement by each panelist, I have asked them prepare about 3 to 5 minutes of the answer to the initial question, is organized religion still relevant? Imam?
If I said no, then this would end this pretty quickly. And my career. So the answer is absolutely. And what I'd like to start off with here is, and I recognize that this is a room of individuals that have probably traveled the world quite a bit and seen different spaces, different people, different social contexts, is that oftentimes we view the entire world through our small contexts. And that small context can be as small as the United States of America, the American context as a whole, or it could be Fort Worth and a very particular part of Fort Worth, or a very, specific social context, depending on how you have spread your wings and gotten to know the world that's around you. And so what is taking place in the United States, in Texas, is not necessarily representative of the entire world. So there are places in the world that have actually demonstrated a greater sense of religiosity and a greater clinging to organized religion as a result of the pandemic in different parts of the world. So the studies are still new, obviously, because we're still in this pandemic, even if Wesley says we're not. We're still in the midst of this. Our masks are off, but people are still left with a lot of deep questioning. And ultimately, they're seeking truth. And the appeal of organized religion is that it offers truth claims on top of many other things. And I think that it would be foolish of us to think that religions that have been around for over 1,000 years are going to suddenly disappear. However, I do think that what people are seeking is directly tied to their exposure to these various religions and religious groups and people and ideologies that have otherwise been demonized, and they are realizing that they are actually profoundly beautiful. And that is the beauty of diversity, that we can gain an appreciation of each other. And as a Muslim, I never have any issue gaining divine wisdoms and truths from Judaism and Christianity, because we do see ourselves as growing out of the Abrahamic way. But I think that the great benefit of multiculturalism and us coming together is that we get to experience people. And once we let our guards down and get to experience the other, we actually can learn from the other. And once we can learn from the other, we can actually become better versions of ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pastor Johnson. So as founder and executive director of Pastors for Texas Children, I know you have a unique perspective in how organizing affects what you do in the community. So
we do. We have about 2,500 faith leaders in our network, and we mobilize those leaders for public education advocacy and also for local public school assistance. I think Imam Suleiman is exactly right. The answer to the question is yes. And for the reasons that he gave, I'll just say, and I'm going to make my remarks uncharacteristically brief because we want to hear from this Muslim imam and this Jewish rabbi. I think I represent a tradition that probably is more commonly experienced here in Rotary. Look, it's not pluralism that's the threat to a vital faith. Pluralism and diversity is an enhancement to faith. Threats to religion are materialism, hyper-individualism, that I am my own reality. The second thing that I see as a real threat is the identification of any particular religious brand with a governmental endorsement. We founded this country on the separation of church and state. It is our unique American value. It doesn't mean that the government endorses my religion. It means that we all support and protect the free expression. Voluntary is the word. Voluntary expression of our own individual faith. Now, I've just said a mouthful in two different ways. It ought to hit all of us right between the eyes, because I have to let God challenge my hyper-individualism each and every day. And especially when I come to Rotary, I realize that the world is diverse. And there are political views and religious views and all kinds of views that are different from mine. And what a great thing that is. We've discussed some of this at our table, Karen, in terms of gender and in terms of generation. These are huge issues. I think organized religion is around to stay because I am not my own reality. And I have to get with my congregation now is small. I've served big congregations in my lifetime. Now it's small. We have the same issues that First United Methodist Church of Fort Worth has, a huge congregation, or Broadway Baptist, a congregation I served. In our little 50-member congregation, we deal with all of these complexities too. We'll continue to, but we'll continue to gather because we need each other.
thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Mecklenburger, is organized religion still relevant?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in Rotary all my adult life, really. I've been a Rotarian in Michigan and now here for a long time. So it's always a pleasure to be here. And I couldn't agree more with what both of my colleagues just said. Of course, ask three preachers, do you think religion is relevant? Do you do anything important? We think so. Why is it important? Well, in a vast, impersonal, urban society, without a pandemic, people are lonesome, all right? Not because there aren't others around, but because it's really pretty lonesome out there in the crowd if you don't have a way to get to know them. So we provide community. We provide a philosophy of life about loving other people and about how to behave that should be important to individuals and is important to millions of individuals. Some of you, I'm sure, most of you perhaps. It's important. I believe that. Lots of you would agree. And now let me make you a little more uncomfortable. You probably are familiar with the Pew Research Institute, which does survey research on all kinds of issues, but quite consistently, they like to shake up the religious world by doing surveys of what do Americans really believe and what do they do and why. All right, so the Pew people just came out with a new survey of American Jewry. They did one 8 years ago, so it was our turn again. And they pronounced, based on thousands of people in this survey, that half of American Jews truly believe that religion is important and is a big part of their lives. Which is to say, and half of them don't believe that it's a big part of their lives. They may have an attachment to keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive, or to Israel, or to whatever Jewish, but basically it's not that big a deal to half of American Jewry. Now, if you're Christian, don't get too comfortable, because by way of comparison for the Jews reading this survey, we find that 1/3 of American Christians don't find religion terribly important to their lives either. Well, 1/3 is better than half, until you look down to the next page. Actually, it's not down the page. And the question is, how often, and there's all kinds of levels, but the basic question is, do you come to worship regularly, weekly, which all of our people, we tell them they'd be wise to do, right? And in fact, the answer is, I've got the numbers here up, but anyway, 1/3 of American Jews, come to worship regularly, but half of them rarely, if ever. And by way of contrast with Christians, 50% of Jews come only rarely, if ever. 52% of Christians come only rarely, if ever. Now, all right, it's really relevant and important because we're teaching such important values: how to get the most out of life and relate to God and relate to your fellow humans locally and globally, love and don't hate, practice justice, and so on and so forth. But if half the people never come and get that regular reinforcement of the values that are the cement of our social contract, we're in trouble. Well, are we really in trouble? Let me end on that. I could turn it open to a discussion right there, but
But let's not.
Okay. No, I won't, I promise. One more minute. Open the newspaper. You remember newspapers? Turn on the TV news, and half of the polity thinks the other half is lying to them big time, and that other half thinks the first half is lying to them big time, right? And we can't get consensus on any major issue, including, you mentioned the pandemic, right? Including as an expression of our great love as a Judeo-Christian Islamic Abrahamic society, we can't reach a consensus on whether people should wear a mask or get an inoculation in order to protect not just themselves, but their neighbors and their fellow human beings. Yes, it's relevant, but it's only workable to the extent that people come.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. There were a few questions. I'm going to pass over a little bit of what we had kind of in the script, because I think we've touched on some very good topics that lend itself to further discussion on these questions that were brought up and that were sent in. And thank you very much for those of you that did. But Rabbi, you mentioned the social contract, and I think each of you really talked on the social contract that we have towards each other as human beings and as members of society. And so I'm going to go to this question that I think is most relevant for us, especially here in Fort Worth. So exactly 58 years ago, on June 11th, 1963, President Kennedy gave his famous civil rights speech in which he said, "We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. Today, we are still struggling with the same moral issue, and many of us look to faith-based institutions for moral leadership. So how can our churches, synagogues, mosques provide us with that leadership? And more specifically, how can our faith-based institutions begin now in a coordinated way to prepare our community for the national spotlight that will accompany the criminal trial for the 2019 killing of Tatiana Jefferson. It's very relevant. It will be happening in August. And Imam, let's start with you. Unless you'd rather start with Pastor.
No, thank you for the question. And first and foremost, I think that a quote that comes to mind, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't remember the exact quote, but Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said something along the lines of, the church is not meant to be the master or the servant of the state, but its conscience. It is not its tool, but rather it is meant to be its guide and its critic. Faith has to maintain a moral high ground, a consistency that is based on timeless principles and values that do not succumb to temporary shifts of trend or power, or simply become a language for secular, polarized opinions that are out there. If anything, faith can either add fuel to the wrong fire, or it can light up the fire of our values and bring people back to their consciousness and say, this is where we fundamentally agree upon the sanctity of a human being and the right of a human being to have justice. And I think that one of the fundamental problems with faith, especially when it's instrumentalized by power, and this is not just the case in the United States, though it is the case in the United States, is that faith is usually used to suffocate justice. Faith is usually used to tell people that have moral outrage, righteous anger, when they see an obvious injustice that the scriptures don't need to tell you is an injustice. In Islam, we believe in something called fitrah, which also I'm sure has a basis in Judeo-Christian thought, which is a natural disposition that we have. So as Muslims, we believe that every human being has an inclination not just to God, but to justice and mercy, that we are born with those values of a connection to God that's there, that if you try to quiet it, you'll feel a little disrupted when you start to try to ignore it, and a connection to justice and mercy. And so that young person in the street that might not have figured out their organized religion yet, or how to organize their religious philosophy, knows that there's something wrong with a woman being shot dead in her home while playing with her nephew, Zion, a PlayStation game or whatever it may be, that there's something wrong with what happened to George Floyd, that there's something wrong with the way that human beings are treated at the border, that there's something wrong with the way that our country uses its foreign policy and dehumanizes victims abroad. Historically, there's something wrong with this. And so what religion has to do is has to not put out the moral outrage, but to contextualize it, to give it a trajectory. Well, what's your end goal? How can I help you? How can I lend my voice to your voice? And this is the type of society that we are seeking, because when religion only becomes concerned with the otherworldly, with the afterlife, and I'm going to put this out there, and this is not to offend anybody, though I have a tendency sometimes to offend people, sometimes by my mere existence, right? But I'll say this, that one of the most offensive things that I saw to religion as a whole was a billboard downtown when we had the March for Our Lives demonstration, and there was a sign that said March for Our Eternal Lives. I thought to myself, how tone deaf can you possibly be? March for Our Eternal Lives, as if you shouldn't be worried about the children being shot dead in school, because what you should be worried about instead is the afterlife. If you cannot demonstrate empathy and concern for my worldly life, how can I trust anything that you have to say about wanting good for me in the afterlife?
And that's a very good point. So we were, so briefly, Rabbi, you had mentioned at some point in our conversation this week that something is happening here in Fort Worth. Can you talk about that, about community?
I don't know
coming
how
together?
far it is going to come, but I was talking to Charlie at lunch. We have a group that met for years called Cattle Country Clergy. It was named with tongue in cheek by the minister who founded it from University Christian Church, Al Pennybacker, some of you probably knew. And we got a bunch of fairly well-known clergy from the whole community together once a month. And we didn't take political positions. The point was we knew one another. And when there was a problem, we knew who to call. And the community could come together and organize without saying, gee, I wish I knew somebody in the Black community, but I don't know who to call, sort of. It hasn't died out, but it's not nearly the powerhouse that it once was. But some African-American pastors called some leaders of this group recently and said, this trial's coming up in August, and we better be thinking about what we're going to do. So there have been several meetings devoted to, and I've been in and out of town, and I'm retired officially. My successor has been participating more, but there have been discussions about what should happen next and what can the religious community do. If we're talking together regularly, and not just clergy, but lay people, it's a whole lot easier to respond. We're not doing, on an ongoing basis, we're not doing that very well in Fort Worth. But there is some foundation laid, and I'm hopeful by August it will bear fruit.
Okay. All right. So do you have any thoughts on that, Pastor Charles?
Not one thought.
Not one. 100 instead, right? 100.
Imam, I'm thinking of Dr. King's wonderful metaphor that religious institutions should be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Set the temperature, not take the temperature. And Dr. King is a good faith leader to read. Comes from the Christian tradition, of course. And they're wonderful spokespersons from the Muslim and the Jewish tradition too. A couple of things come to my mind. You know, to be a faithful, out of my tradition, to be a faithful follower of Jesus means two things for me. I say what Jesus said and I do what Jesus did. My authority is Jesus. It's not the president. It's not the governor. It's not a party leader. And that's the standard. And the only way that I can know that and do it, I cannot do that or know it by myself. I have to get with other people who help me to practice and who hold me accountable. So I would just say this, Karen, if the program you're hearing in your church is a program of fear and shame and guilt and exclusion, find another program. The second thing, and this will be the most controversial thing that I say today, but I've taken to trying it out on folks like y'all. That's what preachers do. Do not listen to any preacher who will not come and hold your hand and pray with you when you need him or her to do so. Turn off all television preachers, all of them, because they do not know you, nor will they ever know you. Word remains word. Speaking out of my tradition, Ralph. Word must become flesh. As Omar said, let's get rid of this Gnosticism. And let's get in real relationship with each other. I've known Ralph for many years. I feel like I know Omar because we have a dear mutual friend in George Mason, pastor of the Wilshire Baptist Church of Dallas, and George celebrates Imam Suleiman all the time. And I've heard the Imam speak. But let's, it can start right here. We have a tremendous opportunity coming up this fall to be a lighthouse of love for this country. And we can do it.
Thank you. And on that note, gentlemen, thank you. We all thank you very much. Oh, wait, we have just we have 5 minutes. Okay. So I was trying to be mindful of time because I've got pages and pages. When we're talking about the growth of organized religion, thank you very much. When we're talking about the growth of organized religion, an issue specifically being addressed by the Southern Baptist Convention this weekend, do you, each of you, see a time when we're talking about the role of women in leadership of each of your faith-based traditions? Will there be a time when women will be accepted as leaders of churches, mosques, and synagogues?
When you are part of the discriminated against group, I would say minority, but in this case, women are the majority, right? It's never fast enough. But there are a lot of places where women are recognized and are preaching and are leading. Until 50 years ago, the Jewish community was not one of them, but the first woman rabbi in history is my classmate, Sally Presand. 49 years ago, we were ordained. She was number one. Today, it's half the graduates of the Hebrew Union College are alma mater. And initially, they could be educators, but they didn't get the preaching jobs. But then they started to get the jobs, and then they started to get some of the, in quotes, bigger jobs, as if bigger synagogues are better than smaller synagogues. We all have that American value set. And anyway, by now, Reform Jews and conservative Jews also have lots of women clergy, cantors, as well as rabbis. It's happening, but that's half a century. It's still not 100% as good as it should be, but we're getting there. And I think most Protestant Christian denominations are getting there. But it's a slow slog.
How do you think it's gonna, how do you think the future for the Muslim faith is regarding women and leadership?
I think that one of the things that I always share with fellow clergy and people from different faith communities, it's important not to transimpose certain structures into other religions and faith communities. So in Islam, there is actually only one distinction that exists in Islam, which is scholarship. Traditionally speaking, there is a alim, there's a scholar, and there's a lay person. The scholar, when you lead prayer, you take on the title of an imam. So the word imam as a distinction, as a profession, is actually a made-up profession. So I'm an imposter. I'll just stick. So the idea is that imam simply means someone who leads, so that you lead prayer. And so leading prayer is one thing. And then scholarship, the distinction in Islam is scholarship. And so judges in Islamic tradition, scholarships. The greatest scholar in Islam is a person who narrates the prophetic tradition, which is called a muhaddith or a muhadditha. There's actually a book that was compiled out of Oxford of 10,000 Muslim women scholars throughout history. And so Muslim women scholars have been judges. In fact, the first university in the world, not Muslim university, the first university in the world was founded by a Muslim woman, Fatima al-Fihriya. And so I think that for us, it's about reviving the tradition, not changing. There's nothing that needs to fundamentally be changed. So, and if you come to my mosque, you will find female lecturers, you will find male lecturers, you will find people giving classes right and left where, we're constantly trying to find that. So it's about reviving the best of what our tradition has to offer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So how do you think it's going to go this weekend at the Southern Baptist Convention, Pastor?
Oh, my Lord. Baptists are just characteristically contentious. It'll be contentious. It's what happens when, Baptists have a doctrine called the priesthood of all believers. That's the priesthood of all believers, not the priesthood of every believer. There is a distinction, which is that yes, I am my own priest. I don't need to go through a rabbi or an imam or a priest or any human religious officer. I have direct access to God, but you do also, which again underscores all the values that we've been talking about here. Baptists are not good at incarnating those values. We're a tremendously diverse group of people. There are 26 different Baptist denominations. And that's how it's going to go this weekend.
Thank you for that. I always can trust you to be candid, and you do not disappoint in that way. So with some final words of wisdom about organized religion and its future, Rabbi, let's start with you for a few minutes.
Organized religion is not going to go away and is going to continue and maybe even develop if we work on it hard enough, because the sense of living in God's presence is built into each of us. We want it. We need it.
Yeah, it's a religion, an organized religion, and your communities and congregations are going to be here. I do believe, obviously, American Christianity is changing. The little steeple church on the corner is going away. We can see that in our neighborhoods here in Fort Worth and in Dallas. The iconic churches are going to remain. And we're also going to have this continued generation of 6 or 8 people over here in the corner at the Starbucks with their Bibles open. And I think that's a great trend. And you're going to have all kinds of little home churches and coffee shop churches and beer pub churches and so forth. And we're already seeing that too. That's organized religion too. It's not going it alone, not a lone ranger. I have to be in community.
Wow, so much to say about this. So I'll just say that there's a great article that I read a while back. It's written by a rabbi called The Allure of Narcissistic Spirituality, or The Allure of Spiritual Narcissism. I can't remember which one. It's been that many years, but it was that profound that it stuck with me until now. It's not a long read, The Allure of Narcissistic Spirituality, which essentially supposes that in the 21st century, and especially in the American context, what's happening is that people are turning religion into their yoga class or their next car or their next, you know, it's how does religion make me feel better? How do I make this in service to my worldly material pursuits, which is the antithesis of what religion is supposed to represent. And so we have to get back to rejecting individualism. We have to reject when someone says, when someone takes a hard stance against religion because they suppose that religion has brought about much division in the world, I think that we have to recognize that people are inherently tribal, and religion has to become a means of bringing people together. And we have to reject this assumption that the more faithful a person is to their faith, the more divisive they're going to be. The 20th century is an example of how isms, none of which actually were religion, by the way, communism, fascism, all of the isms that led to the 20th century being the deadliest century in the history of the world, none of those isms were religious isms. And so we have to push back on that. And I'll end with this statement that in the United States context, let's remember that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was who he was, in large part because of his faith. That in my tradition, Malcolm X of Haj Malik al-Shabazz and Muhammad Ali were largely who they were because of their faith traditions, that Rabbi Heschel was largely who he was because of his faith tradition. And so we have to push back on this idea that faith necessarily makes us divisive, bigoted, unproductive in society. Rather, it can be indeed a means of bringing us together and appreciating one another.
And respecting each other's faiths is a part of this courageous conversation series. Thank you, Scott and President Carlo, for bringing it to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just close quickly by saying the world tells us that the 3 gentlemen seated on stage should not get along, right? The world tells us we should find out what are we more different about and how can we find reasons to hate one another. But folks, this is the snapshot of the world that could be. And I wish that we could broadcast this on cable news tonight and everybody could see what a conversation with civility, dignity, and respect could look like. And I pray for our community this August or fall or whenever the trial happens, that those of us from all faiths and backgrounds can join arms to protect the dignity, protect the DNA of what makes Fort Worth, and that's the people in it. And so I thank all of our panelists and Karen. It is a tradition of the Rotary Club of Fort Worth to donate a book to the Fort Worth Public Library in honor of the program today. We have copies of that book plate with your name in it to honor you for today. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please thank Karen and our panelists for today. I'll close quickly. Join us next week for Miss Opal Lee, a living legend here in Fort Worth, also with Commissioner Roy Brooks, to talk about Juneteenth. We have an international committee meeting and a board of directors meeting. And folks, thank you so much for coming today. What a great program. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Friday.